The V-1 flying bomb was a pulse jet powered weapon which would be used by the German forces towards the later end of the Second World War. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minute, and join me on the workbench today as I build and review the 1/48 scale V-1 flying bomb from Tamiya. I have already done a full unboxing on this particular kit, so for a deeper dive inside the box where I take a look at the sprues, decals and instructions, take a look at that dedicated video. In this video I'll be focusing on what this kit is like to build and rounding it off with a review at the end. As a little side note, this video was kind of chosen by you guys, the community. This one actually came second in a recent poll. And seeing as I've already built the winning subject, I thought it was time to crack on with this one. To make sure you don't miss out on the chance to take part in any future polls and shape the content that is featured on the channel, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss that opportunity. But without any further ado, let's get into the build of this one. As is quite normal for my builds, the parts were removed from the sprue using my side cutters, and any little bits of flash or excess plastic can be cleaned up using a sharp knife or a sanding stick. Fortunately, the mould quality on this kit is pretty decent and flash is kept to a minimum. I'm going to be using Tamiya extra thin cement as my glue of choice during this build. And there isn't that much to actually assemble in this kit. This is down to the fact that it features a whopping 17 parts. So this isn't going to be a particularly long build. The first parts to be joined together were the main sort of fuselage parts, if that's what you can call it for a flying bomb. And then I joined onto this the air intake parts for the pulse jet. The wings simply slot into their relevant holes on the side of the body of the weapon. And this step is repeated for the tail surfaces. On my example there was a bit of a seam line down the centre, and I did my best to try and clean it up, but actually I don't think I went quite far enough, as there is a bit of a seam still visible in the finished build later on, but this just comes down to my sort of attention to detail. If I were to do this one again, I would definitely address these seams a little bit better. And that's the flying bomb complete. So now let's turn our attention to the little dolly that also comes in the kit. This is fairly straightforward to assemble as well, with the various support parts being joined onto the main chassis, and the towing arms added onto their relevant positions. I did initially think about keeping the wheels off to make painting a bit easier, but I then decided that it probably wouldn't make much difference, so I just glued them on anyway. And that's it, this build is pretty much complete, so it's now time to move on to some painting. But actually, before I can get into any painting, it is indeed time to prime. I've decided to go for a Tamiya Surface Primer in grey. This was simply applied to the dolly and the flying bomb, and a few thin coats would ensure that any subsequent layers of paint would stick to the surface. Having done a little bit of research, it would seem that I have the correct colours for this flying bomb, contained within this Vallejo paint set. So from this set, the first paint I'm going to use is this black-green RLM 70. I will actually add a little drop of Tamiya X20A acrylic thinner. Although this paint is airbrush ready, I do find that I may get tip dry from previous experience, and this little drop of thinner can just help prevent that. This was then airbrushed onto the entire dolly assembly. I did do a little bit of research, but it wasn't quite clear categorically what colour these dollies may have been, and it would seem that they were kind of painted with whatever was available, and I could sort of see a preference towards a dark grey, but it is possible that there were greens and even yellow ones as well. But sometimes modelling is about expressing our individuality anyway, and just having a go at things our own way, so I stuck with this dark green colour. I did think this dark green would help with a bit of pre-shading, so on the flying bomb I decided to go over some of the panel line areas just to add a little bit of extra contrast. It's possible not much of this will be seen in the finished build, but at least I know I have done a little bit of practice with this technique. Following on from this, light blue RLM 65 was loaded into the airbrush. I did try and preserve some of that pre-shading to add a little bit of extra contrast, but I do need a little bit more practice with this particular technique, which I'll explore in future builds. When that blue was dry, I moved onto the upper surfaces. For this colour I'm using a dark green RLM 71. And once again this was airbrushed onto the upper surfaces. I decided not to do any masking though for the separation between the upper and lower surfaces, instead opting to do a bit of practice with my airbrush control. It is my understanding that these weapons, as they are single use, the painting would have been just applied to be just good enough to give them a bit of camouflage. And from what I can tell online, there were a lot of different variations on how this camouflage would have been applied, so some of it appears to have been applied in the field. In my particular example, I decided that I would just do a singular colour on the top half, and try and make the separation between the upper and lower colours as neat as I could by practicing my airbrushing skills. When that was all done and dry, I decided that I would use this gloss varnish as a preparation layer for the decals. This gloss varnish was thinned slightly with some water to help it flow a little better. A few thin coats of this would be applied and then they were left to dry. And now I can move on to the decals. You do get a small sheet of decals included in this kit, and it features pretty much just the stencils and things that would have been present on this kind of weapon. It is worth noting though that you do get a choice of 2 different registration numbers. So in my case I decided to cut away the one I wasn't going to use, and then because I'm a little bit lazy, I stuck the entire sheet into some warm water to help separate them from the backing paper. Incidentally, if you'd like to get your own brush water mug, you can find that on my merch store. Micro Set and Sol will be my setting solutions of choice in this build. First up, Micro Set from the blue bottle. That will be brushed onto the areas where the stencils are going to go. The relevant decal was then carefully slid off the backing paper and positioned. A little bit more of the setting fluid would allow these decals to soften into the surface of the plastic. The decal application process is relatively straightforward and I didn't experience any real problems. Once the decals have been applied and appropriately positioned, some Micro Sol from the red bottle would be brushed over the top to further soften them into the plastic and make them appear as though they were painted on. Whilst those decals are fully curing, I decided to use some gunmetal paint to pick out the little propeller on the nose, which I'm pretty sure is for generating electricity, and also on the pitot tube. I would also carefully freehand this into the engine air intake. With that done, a further coat of gloss varnish would be airbrushed over the entire model. This is in preparation for some weathering, and it should help protect the transfers. And speaking of the weathering, I've decided to first start with a rust wash. This is an enamel wash, but I thinned it down with a little white spirit to make it less obvious. This was liberally applied over the entire dolly to make it look a little bit more grimy and as though it's been used. And I would also add this onto the flying bomb. My hope here is that it will run into the recessed details and make them appear a little bit grimier, but also bring them out and highlight them slightly. Any excess wash that I was unhappy with though, I could carefully remove with a cotton bud soaked in some more white spirit. I would clean up the model until I got the effect that I was kind of looking for. This would then be left to dry, and once fully cured, it was time to give this a final finishing coat. I decided I would use the Humbrol Matte 49 acrylic clear varnish just to dull down all of that gloss that I've previously applied. This will make the model look more uniform There is another little step I want to do, and that is to add a bit of dry brushing. So I've got this matte 01, which is a primer grey colour, and this was carefully dry brushed over the dolly to help highlight any raised details and add further contrast, as well as on the flying bomb, just to bring out some of the raised details that are present on this model as well. And with that, I'm calling my build of the Tamiya V-1 flying bomb in 1/48 scale complete. And that's another build under the belt. This one was actually a pretty fun little build. There's not a great deal to this kit, as it only consists of 17 parts in total, and generally you can make very quick progress with its assembly. There isn't a great deal of flash, and the details are moulded quite crisply. The only thing that annoys me a little bit about this kit is that seam down the centre of the model, but as mentioned, I could have spent a bit more time addressing that. Also, the little turbine on the nose for the electrical power, that is moulded onto the model, and I found I kept knocking it and bending it out of shape. A little bit annoying, but easily repairable if you do damage it. I like the inclusion of the little dolly, and I think that perhaps all this needs now is a couple of figures and a little diorama, but that's definitely an idea for a future video. Some facts about this kit then. This 1/48 scale model actually dates from 1997. Well, at least that's when the tooling was created. Since then, it would seem that this has pretty much been the only release that you will find. No doubt, of course, this is in constant production, so your example, if you find one in the shop, might be more recent than 1997. There are some small ejector pin marks on a few visible surfaces, but typically, if you aren't looking for them, you aren't going to notice them. And on the whole, this is a simple but well moulded model with some good level of detail. Technically, this kit does come with 2 different paint schemes, as I previously mentioned, but that only comes down to the fact that there are 2 different registration numbers. Whilst there are painting instructions in colour on the box, you could pretty much do this in any paint scheme that you wanted based on a historical reference, as it seems to me that there were just absolutely loads of different variations that these flying bombs would have been painted in, especially given the fact that they were single use. Something that I would like to explore a little bit further in the future is that free-handing of German camouflage with an airbrush. I don't think this looks too bad, but I definitely think I could make the mottling and separation between the upper and lower colours a bit neater. Perhaps I'll look at swapping out to a finer needle for my airbrush in the future. I do keep a log of everything that I do inside of my modelling journal, and you can find my modelling journal on Amazon if you'd like to get a copy for yourself and keep a note of your own builds inside of them. As I look through my book now, at the notes that I've made, I actually took just about 2 days to complete this kit, which is phenomenally fast. Normally my builds take a lot longer, so this is definitely a weekend build if you fancied getting one. And seeing as the recommended retail price here in the UK is £9.99, or at least that's what it appears to be because it's quite hard to find a RRP for Tamiya kits, but at £9.99 that's not particularly expensive, and given what we've seen inside the box, I think that's reasonably good value for this kind of model. So yeah, pretty happy with this one. I probably could consider getting another one of these in the future, perhaps to explore a different paint scheme. And again, practice some more painting techniques. But I think I need to build a fair few models out of my stash before I can justify buying any more kits. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. This is an inexpensive model kit, and whilst not particularly complex, does benefit from a good level of detail. It does have a few minor issues, but nothing that really detracts from creating a interesting looking kit. As always, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. Massive thanks to these guys on screen, and if you'd like to join them and find out what the additional perks Model Club members get, take a look at the links in the description. I would like to welcome our newest members to the club. They are Simon, Matt, Jimmy, Adam, Matt, Mayador, and Raoul. Welcome to the club. Alternatively, if you'd like to support the channel in other ways, there are extra ways to do so, and again, full information is below the video. The best way to support the channel for free though is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, from me here on the workbench today, the last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you again next time.